It seems like we have the right hand and the left hand of the same thing. And I know when you vote Democrat and you vote Republican, I know what you can expect. They're going to lie to you, they're going to steal from you, and they're going to build more and more prisons to lock you and your children up. And that's basically all they're doing.
We do have, you can Wikipedia this or Google it, the highest prison population per capita and in actual numbers by far. That's one of the categories we're number one in, and we have like double that amount. It's not just a little bit more. We have a whole lot more. Most of it is for nonviolent drug offenses in this war on drugs. Now, let's go over your platform. You have on michaelkokoski.com your list of issues. You list foreign policy, social security, federal spending, environment, immigration, and U.S. military in Hawaii. Why don't you do a quick rundown on your issue platform, sir? We'd like to hear the issues. After all, that's what should be the number one thing, right?
Well, for me, I spent 20 years in federal prison as a victim of the drug war. I got in trouble for selling LSD at a Grateful Dead show when I was a kid a long time ago. And I know firsthand what's wrong with the criminal justice system. See, these drug laws, they subject people to trial by legislature. And that's why we have these very high incarceration rates. And that's why the federal government has a 98% conviction rate. Because here in the United States, under the English principles of law, there's two elements that must be proven to the satisfaction of a jury, and to the satisfaction of a jury only. One is called actus rea. That's the criminal act. The jury must first determine that a criminal act has been committed. And once the jury has determined that the defendant has committed a criminal act, the jury is then required to look into the mens rea, which is the criminal intent. Because only a jury can determine whether or not a crime has been committed, and if so, whether or not a person should be punished as a felonious criminal. And in order to do that, they have to look at why on earth someone would share or otherwise distribute these substances that have been banned, these controlled substances, the drugs, that they have been blacklisted. But the problem with the Uniform Controlled Substance Act of 1971 is that the Congress has determined for the jury that anyone who shares marijuana must be punished as a felonious criminal. And that's what's wrong with the drug war. And in all of these drug cases, no matter what the substance is, no matter what the drug that these people are caught sharing, the court converts all that down to grams of marijuana for sentencing. So each and every drug offender in prison or on probation today in the United States, each and every one of them are being incarcerated due to a weight of marijuana, regardless of what drug they've been caught with. And each and every one of them has been convicted by the Congress of Richard Nixon, because the Congress of Richard Nixon determined that anyone who shares pakalolo, that's what we call marijuana in Hawaii, we call it pakalolo, anyone who shares the pakalolo plant must be punished as a felonious criminal. And when that happens, you subject the people to trial by legislature. And that is what's wrong with our court system today. Another terrible act of the Congress was the Omnibus Crime Control Act of 1964. That's what made it illegal for a convicted felon to own or possess a firearm. Well, you think on the surface that sounds like a pretty good idea. But here's the problem with that. The police officers are forced to, they're required, they're duty bound to enforce that piece of legislation. And the police officer, he cannot tell the difference from a person who is a convicted felon and who isn't a convicted felon. You can't tell the difference walking down the street. You really can't look at a guy and say, oh, this one's a convicted felon and this one's not. So they train the police officers to treat everyone like a convicted felon. And that causes a lot of friction, especially on the mainland, where I see all the police shootings, and it's just terrible. And, the truth of the matter is they are bringing the people into bondage. If you look at it realistically, since the end of the Second World War, our government, the people within our government that we've elected to go into Congress, that we've put into the office of presidency, they have literally stolen all of our gold and all of our silver. There's no longer any gold or silver in common circulation. The money is backed up by nothing.
We'll go into the monetary in a little bit. Let me just touch back up on the war on drugs and the criminal system real quick, because
Okay.
I think in the 1960s, people could literally buy LSD legally, and there were psychiatrists that actually, I mean, you did nothing more than what a psychiatrist would have done, like in the 1960s before it was on the Controlled Substance Act. And in the trial, they probably didn't bring in the person that you sold it to ask if it was consenting. And honestly, if I was on the jury, you've heard of jury nullification. I mean, if that's all that you truly did, and it was a consenting transaction, then I would have exercised my right of jury nullification to put not guilty on the prison population. Ever since Nixon started the war on drugs, it immediately goes up. I mean, it's just an exponential, like a plateau that goes upwards. About half the people that are in prison are in there. I mean, we're letting rapists and murderers go out before people that are in there for nonviolent drug offenses. And think of how many families that have been split up. I mean, how was going to prison on, I mean, I know it was horrible, but I mean, it probably affected your whole family, and not just that. I mean, your life, and took 12 years out of your time. I mean, I think, honestly, if there was justice, you would be compensated for the time that you were in there. But, I mean, what would you do about the war on drugs? What kind of legislation would you present? And how would you convince the people in your state, the mainstream, to elect you on this issue?
Well, I'm of the mind that most of the people in America are happy with the way things are. They've got their job, they've got their credit, they've got their house payment, they've got their children, and they've got their lives that they lead continually day after day out. They watch the television, they read the news, they listen to the radio, and you know what? As long as they just don't want anybody to really rock the boat too much, I think that people have pretty much been brainwashed to just keep voting the way they vote. I'm really not sure exactly why it's like that.
Give you some hope, because if you look at Gallup polls, actually about 70, just anyone can look up Gallup polls, distrusting Congress has a record low approval rating. People think that there's corruption. If people had a choice, they'd say they would throw them all out. I mean, these are recent polls. I think the American people knows what's up, but there is a perception that people are, content. But I don't think that's actually true. I mean, I do hear what you're saying, though. I mean, I do hear what you're saying.
It's apathy. Apathy is the number one. Apathy is the number one enemy. If the American public were to wake up and understand what's going on, if they were to care enough to want to make a change, then yeah, we could make that change. And it would be something that we could all do together. It would be great for our entire country. It would be really good. I know that if I was elected to the United States Senate, I would call for a no confidence vote in the Uniform Controlled Substance Act, and I would make my case as to why it is bad legislation. It is a bill of attainder. It says in the Constitution, Article 1, Clause 9, it says that Congress shall make no ex post facto law or bill of attainder. Now, a bill of attainder is any piece of legislation that subjects a particular person or an easily identifiable group of people to punishment merely because legislators think them guilty of conduct deserving of punishment. Back in the 1960s, the hippies and the war protesters were really giving the Nixon administration a lot of trouble over the Vietnam War and all the things that they were doing. And, they looked at these people and they said they've got the right to assemble, they've got the right to redress their grievances, and they needed to find a way to shut these people up. And they noticed that all these people were smoking marijuana. So they just made it a law to share the marijuana. And they said, well, this is a way that we can lock them up, put them in prison, throw them away, take away their right to vote, and just treat them like a bunch of criminals. And what it's done is it's completely disenfranchised a large group of people from government. Most of the people who have been affected by the Uniform Controlled Substance Act They feel as if they have no representation in government at all.
Michael, you're absolutely right. I just want to back you up on that on a second. Very recently, there were tapes released from the Nixon administration by one of his staff members that admitted exactly what you're saying. They admitted that they started the war on drugs to get after hippies and after racial minorities, the black population, and that's why they started the war on drugs. You can actually get footage of them admitting that.
It is. I believe that it is not possible for a learned juror, for a judge, to sit on a federal bench for 5 or 10 years and hear these drug cases day in and day out and research the law and do the work. There is no way that a learned juror could sit on a federal bench for 5 years and not understand that they are subjecting the people to trial by legislature. Because like you said, all these people have testified before Congress about the effects of these drugs. All these people have testified before Congress about all these things. Congress is the one who made that determination. In drug cases, they never asked the jury to determine why the person shared the marijuana. And that's required. Only the jury can determine whether or not a crime has been committed, and if so, whether or not a person should be punished as a felonious criminal. And to do that, the jury must look into the question of mens rea, the criminal mind. What on earth was this person thinking when they did that? Why did they do it? What was their motive? And friendship is not a crime. If you share marijuana in friendship, it cannot be said that you had a felonious evil heart to cheat the guy out of anything because it was done in friendship. Food and drink is something that human beings share naturally throughout history. We share these things. And what else do we have that we can share intimately with our friends? Our food, our drink, our shelter, maybe our covering. But that's really the most basic things in life. And when you think about it, the Congress does not have the authority to dictate under free men and women what we may or may not eat, drink, or otherwise consume. Dietary laws are an establishment of religion. That has no business. The state has no business in dictating dietary laws to free people. It's just absolutely absurd and ridiculous.